I stood in my study at Chartwell on a summer evening in 1915, watching darkness settle over the Kent countryside, when a telegram arrived confirming my removal from the Admiralty. The Gallipoli campaign had ended in catastrophe, thousands dead, my judgment publicly condemned, my political future apparently finished at 40 years old. For weeks afterward, I would wake before dawn, mind already racing through elaborate defenses against critics who existed only in my imagination. Each newspaper article set me pacing the floor, composing brilliant rejoinders that would never be delivered. I was exhausting myself fighting phantoms, granting to scribblers and political enemies the power to determine whether I should have a peaceful morning. I had become a slave to others' opinions, without recognizing the chains I had forged myself. Then came recognition. The failure was fact, immutable and painful. But what it meant for my future, this remained mine to decide. I could permit it to define me permanently, or I could extract every lesson while refusing to be destroyed. In that space between event and meaning, I discovered something that would sustain me through darker trials yet to come. Sovereignty over one's own interpretation is the foundation of all genuine freedom. Everything else in these pages flows from this single truth. The prison you built without knowing. You have been granting injury its power without realizing it. Every time you allow an insult to ruin your morning, every time you permit a setback to shake your resolve, every time you craft your words from fear rather than conviction, you are choosing servitude. This is not metaphor. You are making an active decision to surrender sovereignty over your own spirit, but the decision has become so habitual that it feels like inevitability. The first step toward freedom is recognizing that you are in prison. The second is understanding that you built it yourself, brick by brick, with your habitual responses to life's arrows. The third, and this is where hope enters, is realizing that what you have built, you can also dismantle. After my removal from the Admiralty following Gallipoli, I discovered something unsettling about myself. Each morning, I would scan the newspapers with mounting anxiety. Each critical article, and there were many, would set me pacing my study, composing elaborate mental defenses against attacks that existed only on newsprint. By afternoon, I was exhausted not from productive work but from combat with phantoms. I was granting newspaper scribblers the power to determine whether I should have a peaceful day. This recognition, though humbling, was also the first crack in my prison walls. I had seen the chains clearly for the first time. Most mental suffering occurs not during actual adversity, but in anticipation and rumination. You exhaust yourself fighting battles that exist only in imagination. Notice how much energy you spend defending yourself against attacks that have not occurred, preparing for criticisms that may never come, replaying past slights endlessly. This pattern reveals that the injury is not the event itself, but your relationship to it. Each morning, for 1 week, observe which anticipated difficulties are already affecting your mood before anything has actually happened. The meeting at 10 o'clock poisons breakfast at 7. The difficult conversation planned for Thursday casts its shadow over Tuesday. This awareness reveals how much suffering is self-inflicted through projection. Calculate honestly what your habitual reactivity costs you. Relationships strained by defensiveness, opportunities missed from fear of criticism, energy wasted on resentment, peace forfeited to protect pride. When you see the price clearly, motivation for change becomes urgent. The bill has been mounting for years. It is time to examine it. Begin today with honest observation. Do not try to change anything, yet simply watch yourself. When something occurs that typically bothers you, pause for 10 seconds before reacting. In that pause, ask yourself, am I about to grant this power over my spirit? Notice particularly the minor irritations, the traffic, the discourteous shop clerk, the colleague's dismissive tone. These small surrenders establish the pattern that operates during larger crises. Keep a small notebook and record each instance where you notice yourself granting power to external circumstances. By evening, you will likely have a dozen entries. This is not cause for despair, but for recognition. You have lived in this prison so long that you have forgotten what freedom feels like. Do not confuse awareness with self-criticism. Some readers will use this recognition to berate themselves. I have been so weak. This is merely another form of servitude, now enslaved to an ideal of what you should be. The recognition should produce neither pride nor shame, but simple observation. After this chapter, you can no longer claim unconsciousness. You have seen the pattern. You understand that you have been choosing your imprisonment, though the choice was hidden from you. This brings a peculiar mixture of discomfort. You mean I did this to myself? And liberation. Then I can also undo it. The prison walls remain, but you have located the door. Recognition alone does not break chains. You see your slavery now, but a crucial question remains. What exactly is this servitude costing you? What your servitude has stolen from you? Every moment you spend in reaction to others' opinions, you are not spending in pursuit of your purposes. Every hour consumed by resentment is an hour not devoted to creation. Every day organized around avoiding potential hurts is a day not lived in service of what matters. The cost of servitude is not merely discomfort, it is the forfeiture of your one irreplaceable life. When you grant external circumstances power over your internal state, you become a puppet whose strings are pulled by fortune, fools, and fate. You cease to be the author of your existence and become merely its narrator, reporting on what happened to you rather than what you caused to happen. I have observed many men destroyed not by failure but by fear of failure, not by criticism but by terror of criticism. One such man possessed genuine brilliance, sharper mind than most in Parliament, clearer vision of necessary reforms. Yet he never proposed bold legislation, never spoke unpopular truths, never took positions that might draw fire. When asked why, he would say he was being strategic, waiting for the right moment, building consensus. But I knew the truth, and I suspect he did too. He had organized his entire career around avoiding hurt. What might he have achieved had he been free? We shall never know. Every resource spent on reactivity is unavailable for creativity. You have only so much mental energy daily. When you exhaust it defending your ego, nursing grievances, or anxiously anticipating injuries, nothing remains for genuine work. Champions understand this ruthlessly. They refuse to spend precious resources on matters that do not advance their purposes. List the opportunities you have declined, the truths you have not spoken, the bold actions you have not taken, all from fear of potential hurt. A conversation not initiated because it might go badly, a project not proposed because it might fail, a boundary not set because someone might be offended. This audit reveals what your servitude has cost. Who would you be if criticism did not frighten you? What would you attempt if failure could not diminish you? What would you create if others' opinions held no power? This vision is not fantasy, it is your life as it might be lived from sovereignty rather than servitude. The gap between current reality and this vision is the measure of your chain's weight. This week, identify 3 specific situations where fear of injury has constrained your behavior. Perhaps you have remained silent in meetings though you possessed valuable insights, fearing disagreement. Perhaps you have avoided necessary confrontation with a colleague, fearing conflict. Perhaps you have not pursued an opportunity, fearing rejection. For each situation, write 2 paragraphs. First, what fear prevented. Second, what might have been possible had you acted from sovereignty rather than servitude. This is not about regretting past choices, but about seeing clearly what is at stake going forward. For one day, track how many minutes you spend in reactive mental states, replaying past slights, anticipating future criticisms, defending yourself to imaginary opponents, nursing resentments. Set a timer and actually measure it. Most people are shocked to discover they spend 2 to 4 hours daily in such states. Multiply this by days, months, years. This is the time servitude has stolen from you. Do not transform this recognition into another source of reactivity. I have wasted so much time. I am such a fool. That is merely replacing one servitude with another. The point is not to castigate yourself for past losses, but to understand what is at stake going forward. You now understand the true price of servitude. It is not merely discomfort, but the forfeiture of your potential. Every day you spend in reactive patterns is a day you are not spending in creative pursuit of what matters. This recognition should produce urgency, not anxiety, but urgency. Your life is finite. The question is no longer whether reactivity is uncomfortable, but whether you can afford it. The answer is clear. You cannot. The paradox. How champions feel everything, yet surrender nothing. The great misunderstanding is this. People believe that to avoid being hurt, one must avoid feeling. They think the champion has achieved invulnerability through insensibility, that he stands unmoved because he cares about nothing. This is precisely backward. The champion feels everything perhaps more keenly than those who claim to be wounded. He has not deadened himself. He has transformed the significance of feeling. When pain comes, he experiences it fully but does not grant it governing power. When insult arrives, he notes it clearly, but does not organize his response around protecting his ego. After my daughter Marigold died in 1921, Some observers expected me to be strong in the British manner, to suppress grief, to carry on as though nothing had happened. I could not do this, nor did I wish to. The grief was real and deep. I felt it without reservation. But I noticed something. The grief did not diminish my capacity to continue my work, to fulfill my duties, to remain engaged with life. I had not permitted sorrow to colonize my entire being. I felt it fully in its proper place, while refusing to let it govern all my hours. This is the alchemy. Feeling is involuntary. Response is chosen. When criticized, you will feel the sting. This is automatic and human. But what you do with that sting is entirely under your control. The amateur mistakes the feeling for the response and believes the former compels the latter. The champion knows they are separate. He feels the sting fully while simultaneously choosing what significance to grant it. Those who feel most deeply often handle adversity best because they have learned to contain intense feeling without being overwhelmed. It is those who flee from feeling who prove most brittle when struck. They have not developed the capacity to experience emotion without drowning in it. The champion has cultivated emotional range through practice. He can feel profound grief, sharp anger, deep joy, all without losing his center. The champion can hold grief in one hand and duty in the other, giving each its due without permitting either to corrupt the other. This is not suppression but sophisticated consciousness. When working, he works fully. When grieving, he grieves fully. Neither colonizes the time belonging to the other. When strong emotion arises this week, grief, anger, fear, joy, practice this. Acknowledge the feeling explicitly. Say to yourself, I am feeling anger, or I am experiencing fear. This simple naming creates a small distance between you and the emotion. Then ask, what does this feeling want to tell me? What is its message? Listen to the answer. Then ask, having received its message, what response serves my purposes best? This three-step process, acknowledge, receive the message, choose response, transforms you from one who is controlled by emotion to one who works skillfully with it. The most common error is attempting to bypass feeling entirely. I will simply not care about criticism. This produces brittle pseudo-strength that shatters under real pressure. Another trap, believing that if you feel hurt, you have failed. No, the champion feels hurt. He simply does not grant it governing power. You now understand that sovereignty does not require coldness. You can feel deeply while refusing to be diminished. This resolves an apparent contradiction. The champion cares intensely about outcomes while remaining unmoved by circumstances. He does this not through contradiction but through sophistication. He has learned to separate feeling from interpretation, experience from response. You need not choose between sensitivity and strength. You can have both. Sovereign evaluation, the power that changes everything. There exists a capacity that separates champions from victims, leaders from followers, free men from slaves. I call it sovereign evaluation, the ability to receive every event, assess its true significance, and choose your response rather than being compelled to react. This is not the stoicism of the ancients, which counsels indifference. The sovereign evaluator cares intensely, perhaps more than others. He simply refuses to allow injury to his values to govern his spirit. He maintains the power to interpret events rather than allowing events to interpret him. This capacity can be cultivated through practice, but first you must understand how it operates. When the Gallipoli campaign ended in catastrophe, I faced a choice point. Thousands had died. My judgment was publicly questioned. My political future appeared finished. For months, I felt the weight of this failure pressing upon me like a physical burden, but in time, I recognized something. The failure was a fact, but what it meant for my future was a decision mine to make. I could permit it to break my spirit and end my usefulness, or I could extract every lesson while refusing to be destroyed by it. The facts remained unchanged, but their significance became mine to determine. This was sovereign evaluation in its most difficult application. Between every event and your response lies a space barely perceptible but infinitely significant. In that space occurs interpretation. Most people move so swiftly from event to response that they never see this space. They believe events automatically produce responses. The champion has learned to perceive and inhabit this space. Here is where sovereignty lives. When injury occurs, the victim asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The sovereign evaluator asks, "What does this mean? And what response serves my purposes?" The first question assumes helplessness. The second assumes agency. Practice asking the sovereign questions until they become reflexive. Events are facts. Interpretations are choices. When someone criticizes your work, the fact is, words were spoken containing negative evaluation. Your interpretation, "This means I am inadequate," or "This reveals the critic's agenda," or "This contains truth I need," is separate from the fact. Learn to hold these separately. In that separation lies your freedom. For the next 7 days, practice this sequence whenever something typically bothers you. First, name the bare fact stripped of interpretation. The colleague spoke dismissively in the meeting. Not, the colleague showed disrespect. That is interpretation. Second, inventory possible interpretations. This might mean, he disagrees with my approach, he is threatened by my competence, he was having a difficult morning, he lacks social grace, he is testing my response. Third, choose the interpretation that serves your purposes best while remaining tethered to evidence. This is not self-deception but sovereign evaluation. You are claiming the power to determine significance rather than having it determined for you. Each evening this week, record 3 events that bothered you. For each, write the bare fact in 1 sentence, stripped of interpretation. Then list 3 possible interpretations of that fact. Finally, note which interpretation you initially accepted automatically versus which would serve you best. This practice trains you to see the space between event and meaning. Do not use sovereign evaluation as excuse for self-deception. If multiple people independently note the same flaw in your work, the interpretation, "They are all wrong and I am right," is likely false. Sovereign evaluation must remain tethered to evidence. You now possess the master key. You understand that events do not automatically produce responses interpretation mediates. Every injury that has governed you did so because you granted it interpretive power. You can withdraw that grant. The surgeon's eye, separating fact from interpretation. Our minds move with such speed from perception to interpretation that we mistake the two for one. Someone criticizes you. Instantly you feel wounded. But between the criticism and the wound occurred an interpretation so swift that you did not observe it. The champion has trained himself to slow this process, to observe with surgical precision the exact moment where interpretation enters. This is not mere philosophical exercise, but practical skill with immediate application. When you can see fact and interpretation as separate, you can consciously choose which interpretations to accept rather than unconsciously accepting those your mind generates automatically. Early in my career, I would enter parliamentary debates already defensive, having interpreted every potential criticism in advance. A colleague's question felt like attack. A moment's silence felt like condemnation. I was exhausting myself responding to interpretations rather than facts. But I learned to pause to hear the actual words spoken before leaping to what they meant. Often, I discovered my interpretation bore little relation to what was actually said. The criticism I feared was not present. The attack I defended against had not occurred. I had been shadowboxing with my own projections. Train yourself to state events as a journalist would report them pure observation without interpretation. Not, "He insulted me, but he said my judgment was questionable." Not, "She dismissed my idea, but she suggested a different approach." This discipline of precise language trains the mind to observe facts cleanly. When something occurs that typically bothers you, count 5 seconds before responding. In those seconds, deliberately separate fact from interpretation. Ask, "What actually happened?" versus, "What do I think it means?" This brief delay allows consciousness to catch up with reaction. Most automatic responses occur in the first 2 seconds. 5 seconds breaks the automaticity. For any event, generate 5 different plausible interpretations. Someone cancels lunch at the last moment. Interpretations. They are unreliable. They had an emergency. They are testing my response. They are overwhelmed. They are reconsidering our relationship. None may be correct, but generating multiple possibilities prevents you from fixating on the interpretation that hurts most. This flexibility is itself a form of freedom. Begin immediately. The next time someone says something that would typically bother you, execute this 3-part sequence. First, force yourself to restate what was actually said, using their exact words if possible. This sounds simple but is difficult. We immediately translate others' words through our interpretive lens. Second, notice what interpretation your mind generated automatically. Observe it without judgment. "Ah, I immediately interpreted this as criticism of my competence." Third, generate 2 alternative interpretations that are equally plausible based on the facts. You need not believe them, simply acknowledge they are possible. This entire process takes perhaps 30 seconds, but breaks the automatic pattern that has governed you for years. Beware of using this technique to avoid genuine feedback. If your supervisor says your work is consistently late, and you interpret this as she is micromanaging, you are likely deceiving yourself. Facts have consequences. Part of surgical precision is acknowledging unpleasant realities. Also, do not become so cautious in interpretation that you trust nothing and no one. The goal is conscious, evidence-based interpretation, not paralysis. Some interpretations are warranted by evidence. Others are merely habitual projections. Learn to distinguish between them. You can now see the machinery of your own reactivity. You observe the instant where interpretation transforms fact into wound. This observation itself breaks the spell. Once you see how you have been creating your own suffering through unconscious interpretation, you cannot unsee it. You may still fall into old patterns, but now you catch yourself faster. The gap between awareness and automatic reaction shrinks with each repetition. You are becoming conscious in precisely the place where you have been most unconscious. How champions make nothing hurt them. By Winston Churchill. The moment of choice, response versus reaction. There is a vast difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic, unconscious, governed by habit and conditioning. Response is deliberate, conscious, chosen in service of your purposes. The reactive person is a puppet of circumstances. The responsive person is sovereign. But here is what most miss. Choosing response does not mean suppressing feeling. When the 1,945 election results came in, showing that Britain rejected me after 6 years of wartime service, I felt sharp disappointment. The feeling was real and appropriate, but I had a choice about what to do with that feeling, whether to let it embitter my remaining years or to acknowledge it while continuing with dignity. The feeling was involuntary. The response was chosen. I remember standing in my study as the election returns arrived, loss after loss. My wife said something meant to comfort. I replied more sharply than intended. I was reacting pain, transforming instantly into words without passing through conscious choice. I caught myself mid-sentence, apologized, and said, "Let me begin again, with intention this time." This small moment illuminated the distinction. The first response was reaction automatic, governed by hurt. The second was response conscious, chosen in service of what mattered: respect for my wife, dignity in defeat, grace under pressure. The facts remained unchanged. My relationship to them had shifted. When injury occurs and you have separated fact from interpretation, you face 3 response options. First, acknowledge and continue, neither suppress the feeling nor be governed by it. Simply note it and proceed with your purposes. Second, extract the lesson. If the injury contains information you need, receive it as gift, however ungraciously delivered. Third, dismiss with clarity. If the injury stems from malice or ignorance and contains nothing useful, release it consciously rather than carrying it forward. If something makes you angry, impose a 10-minute delay before responding, not to suppress anger but to ensure response is chosen rather than automatic. Ask yourself, what response serves my purposes best? What response will I respect tomorrow? What response maintains my sovereignty? Before responding to injury, ask, how will my future self judge this response? 6 months hence, will I be proud of how I handled this or embarrassed? This perspective often reveals that the reactive response, though immediately satisfying, serves neither your purposes nor your character. This week, identify the 3 types of situations that most reliably trigger automatic reactions in you. Perhaps criticism of your work, perhaps feeling dismissed in meetings, perhaps someone questioning your judgment. For these specific triggers, pre-decide your response. Not the content, you cannot know that in advance, but the process. When criticized, I will pause for 5 seconds, acknowledge any truth in the criticism, then decide how to respond based on my purposes rather than my ego. Do not confuse deliberate response with calculated manipulation. Genuine response means your internal state and external behavior align because both are chosen consciously. Also avoid the perfectionist trap. I responded poorly. I am a failure at this. You are learning. The champion still sometimes reacts. He simply catches himself faster. You have now learned to choose response rather than being compelled to react. You can feel deeply while responding deliberately. Each time you exercise this choice, the capacity strengthens. You are rewiring patterns that have governed you for decades. Stages 1 and 2. Recognition and disentanglement. The path to sovereignty begins with ruthless honesty. You must observe how you currently respond to injury without judgment or excuse. This is stage 1 recognition. You cannot remedy a condition you have not diagnosed. Then comes stage 2 disentanglement, learning to separate the bare fact from the meaning you have been automatically assigning to it. These stages are foundational. Skip them, and all subsequent work builds on sand. Most people want to leap directly to not being hurt, but that is impossible without first seeing clearly how you create your own hurt through unconscious interpretation. These 2 stages are neither glamorous nor immediately gratifying, but they are absolutely essential. After my removal from the Admiralty in 1915, I spent months observing my own patterns with the detachment of a scientist studying an insect. Each morning, I would note which newspaper articles affected my mood, which criticisms lodged in my mind, which past events I replayed obsessively. The inventory was humbling. I discovered I had granted astonishing power to the opinions of men I did not respect, to slights that were trivial, to failures that were past remedy. But this recognition, though painful, was also liberating. I could not change patterns I had not seen. Once seen clearly, they lost much of their hold. For 1 week, maintain a log of every instance where you notice reactivity arising, not to judge yourself, but to gather data. Note the trigger, the automatic thought, the feeling, the physical sensation, the urge to respond. This detailed observation reveals patterns you have never consciously examined. Most people discover 3 or 4 recurring patterns account for 90% of their reactivity. Once you have gathered data, look for common elements. What types of injuries trigger you most reliably? Criticism of your competence, being dismissed or ignored, feeling misunderstood, questions of your judgment. Each person has characteristic vulnerabilities. These are not weaknesses to be ashamed of, but simply facts to be understood. Take any recent injury. Write 3 columns. First, bare fact, what actually happened, stripped of interpretation. Second, automatic interpretation, what your mind made it mean. Third, alternative interpretations, other plausible meanings. This 3-column exercise trains the mind to see that interpretation is not inevitable but chosen. Choose one recurring pattern of reactivity, the type of situation that reliably disturbs you. For the next week, become a detached observer of your own response every time this situation occurs. Do not try to change the response. Simply observe it with scientific curiosity. Notice the sequence. Trigger appears, automatic thought arises, feeling follows, physical sensation manifests, urge to respond emerges. Map this sequence precisely. The most common error is using recognition as weapon against yourself. I am so reactive. What is wrong with me? This self-criticism is itself reactivity now directed inward. Recognition should be neutral, even kind. You are observing patterns developed over decades. Of course, they are deeply grooved. You have completed the foundational work. You can now see your reactivity clearly, its triggers, its patterns, its costs. You have also practiced separating fact from interpretation until it feels less foreign. Everything else builds on this foundation. Stage 3. The daily practice of deliberate response. You have learned to see the space between event and interpretation. Now you must learn to inhabit that space, to actually make different choices in the moment, rather than merely wishing you had made them afterward. This is stage 3, and it is the most difficult because it requires changing behavior under pressure rather than analyzing behavior in comfortable retrospect. The key insight: you cannot wait until crisis to practice sovereignty. Crisis reveals what you have cultivated during calm. Therefore, you must practice deliberate response on small matters daily, the minor annoyances, the trivial slights, the petty frustrations. These are not distractions from the real work. They are the work. During the war years, I made it a discipline never to respond to criticism or provocation in the moment, no matter how justified my response or how much the situation seemed to demand immediate reaction. I would acknowledge the comment, state that I would consider it carefully, then impose a mandatory 12-hour delay before actually responding. This drove some people mad, but it served a crucial purpose. It ensured my responses were chosen rather than automatic. Even under the pressure of existential war, I maintained the practice. Small disciplines maintained daily made sovereignty available when everything was at stake. Begin with injuries that matter least. Do not start by trying to respond sovereignly to catastrophic loss or profound betrayal. Start with the colleague who interrupts you in meetings, the driver who cuts you off in traffic, the shop clerk who is rude. These micro-injuries are your training ground. When triggered, take 3 full breaths before responding. In the first breath, notice you have been triggered. In the second breath, separate fact from interpretation. In the third breath, choose your response. This sounds simple but is profoundly difficult under pressure. Practice on small matters until it becomes automatic. Develop standard responses for common triggers. When criticized, I appreciate you sharing that. Let me consider it carefully. When dismissed, I have a different view, but I respect your perspective. When provoked, that is an interesting point. I will think about it. These templates buy time, prevent automatic reaction, and maintain dignity. This week, choose 3 specific situations where you typically react automatically. For these 3 triggers only, implement the 3-breath intervention every single time. Do not try to change your entire life at once. Change these 3 patterns. When the trigger occurs, execute the practice, breathe, notice, separate, choose. Do not attempt too much too soon. The person who tries to respond sovereignly to everything immediately will fail within days and abandon the practice. Start small, expand gradually. Also, do not expect perfection. What matters is the trend. Are you catching yourself faster, succeeding more often, recovering more quickly when you fail? You are now practicing sovereignty daily on small matters. You are rewiring decades-old patterns through consistent practice. Each small victory makes the next slightly easier. This is how genuine transformation occurs, not through sudden insight, but through patient, persistent practice on matters so small they seem almost trivial. Stages 4 and 5. Alchemy and Citadel. The defensive phase is necessary but insufficient. You must learn not merely to deflect injuries, but to transform them into fuel. This is stage 4 reframing, seeing every injury as containing either information you need or confirmation that you are on the right path. Then comes stage 5, building the inner citadel, establishing core purposes so solid that external circumstances cannot shake them. These stages move you from reactive defense to active transformation. The champion at this level does not merely endure injuries, he actively seeks them for the growth they provide. This sounds impossible now, but it is the natural result of diligent practice through earlier stages. During my wilderness years, that decade when I was excluded from government, mocked for warning about Hitler, dismissed as a warmonger, I could have interpreted this exclusion as failure. Many men would have grown bitter. Instead, I chose to see it as freedom. Freedom to speak truth without political calculation, freedom to write the histories that needed writing, freedom to prepare for a role I sensed was coming. Every rejection became confirmation I was on a different path from the compromisers. Every attack became evidence I was speaking truths that needed to be spoken. The injuries remained, but I had transformed their significance. They became fuel. Every injury that stings contains information. If criticism wounds you, ask, does this contain truth I need to hear? Often, the criticism that hurts most carries the grain of truth we have been avoiding. The gift may come wrapped in hostile paper, but it is still a gift. Extract the information, discard the hostility, use the knowledge. When you take a bold stand and face opposition, reframe the opposition as confirmation. If you were speaking comfortable lies, no one would oppose you. Opposition means you are speaking truths that threaten comfortable arrangements. The injury confirms you are on the right path. Identify your core purposes, the values and aims that will remain stable regardless of circumstance. Mine has always been clear: defense of parliamentary democracy and individual liberty. Attacks on my person could not touch this purpose. They might sting but could not deflect me. When you have such a purpose, injuries become merely obstacles in the path, annoying perhaps, but not capable of turning you aside. This week, review every criticism or setback you have experienced in the past month. For each, complete this analysis. Does this contain any truth I need to acknowledge? Could this opposition actually confirm I am on a path that matters? Does this injury affect my core purpose or merely my ego? Write a 1-page document titled My Core Purpose. Include the values you serve regardless of circumstance, the contribution you intend to make with your life, the person you are committed to becoming, the standards you refuse to compromise. This document becomes your citadel. Do not use reframing as excuse for avoiding legitimate feedback. The citadel is not delusion fortress but foundation of genuine conviction. Also avoid the trap of seeking injury for its own sake. The champion does not seek injury but transforms it when it comes. You have now completed the 5 stages. You possess the complete toolkit. Everything else is application and refinement. The path from here is clear: daily practice of these capacities across increasingly difficult circumstances. The sovereign professional, mastery in public affairs. The professional arena reveals whether you possess genuine sovereignty or merely theoretical understanding. Under the pressure of hostile questioning, in the face of public criticism, when your judgment is challenged before others, here is where practice meets reality. The sovereign professional enters every conflict with fundamental security. He is not defending himself but exploring truth and seeking optimal outcomes. He can acknowledge valid criticism without feeling diminished. He can lose specific exchanges without losing himself. He focuses on purpose rather than pride. This capacity separates effective leaders from those constantly protecting their egos, and it can be cultivated through deliberate practice. I have sat through countless hours of hostile parliamentary questioning. Men have impugned my judgment, questioned my motives, attacked my character, all in front of hundreds of observers and with newspapers recording every word. Early in my career, these attacks would set me fuming through dinner. But I learned something crucial. Every defense of ego was energy not spent on actual purpose. When I stopped treating criticism as attack on self and started treating it as information about opponent or opportunity to clarify position, everything changed. I could lose exchanges without feeling I had lost myself. This was liberation. When criticized in professional settings, resist the urge to defend immediately. Instead, that is an important point. Let me address it directly. This acknowledges the criticism without accepting or rejecting it, buying time to formulate a thoughtful response rather than defensive reaction. The non-defensive posture signals strength. Immediate defense signals insecurity. If criticism contains truth, acknowledge it immediately and completely. You are absolutely right that my proposal did not address that concern. Here is how I would address it. This move astonishes critics who expected defense, demonstrates security, and focuses discussion on solutions rather than blame. The amateur fears acknowledging error. The master uses it to demonstrate strength. When discussion becomes personal or ego-driven, redirect to purpose. The question is not whether I am right, but what approach best serves our aims. Let us focus there. This move reclaims the discussion from personality to principle. You cannot be wounded by attacks on your person if the discussion concerns purposes beyond your person. After difficult professional interactions, conduct brief review. What succeeded? What would I do differently? Did I maintain sovereignty or slip into reaction? This review, done without self-criticism, accelerates learning. Before your next difficult professional interaction, prepare by writing answers to these questions. What is my purpose in this interaction? What criticisms might arise? And how will I respond non-defensively to each? If I feel triggered during the interaction, what will be my circuit breaker? This preparation creates a sovereignty plan, making deliberate response far more likely than automatic reaction. Over the next 2 weeks, specifically target one professional situation where you typically react poorly, perhaps when your judgment is questioned, or your competence is doubted, or your authority is challenged. In that specific situation, implement the non-defensive posture and acknowledgement technique. Do not try to transform your entire professional life. Focus laser-like on this one recurring pattern. Do not confuse non-defensive posture with passive acceptance of abuse or incompetence. If someone repeatedly undermines you maliciously, address it directly, but from sovereignty, not reactivity. Say clearly what is unacceptable and what consequences will follow if it continues. This is sovereign assertion, not defensive reaction. You can now navigate professional challenges with sovereignty rather than defensiveness. Criticism no longer threatens your sense of competence. It becomes information or noise to be sorted consciously. You can lose specific exchanges without losing yourself. You can acknowledge error without feeling diminished. You focus on purpose rather than pride. This changes everything in professional life. Your effectiveness increases as your reactivity decreases. The sovereign heart, mastery in relationships. Sovereignty in the intimate sphere presents challenges that public affairs cannot match. In marriage, in family, in those friendships where hearts have truly met here, you cannot maintain the comfortable distance possible in parliamentary debate. You are vulnerable by necessity and design. The question is not whether you shall be vulnerable, but whether vulnerability must inevitably mean servitude to circumstance. It need not. I have known the peculiar pain that comes when those nearest to us disappoint our expectations. When my children chose paths I could not fathom, when the intensity I brought to all things perhaps overwhelmed their capacities, when love was genuine but connection proved difficult. For years, I permitted this distance to govern my spirits. I interpreted it as rejection, as failure, as evidence of some inadequacy in myself. The suffering was profound, but I learned slowly, imperfectly, through much struggle to value what existed rather than tormenting myself over what did not. The relationships were as they were. I could feel sorrow without allowing that sorrow to poison all my waking hours. This was not resignation but acceptance. They are different things entirely. Consider what causes most suffering in intimate relationships. Not the actual circumstances, these are merely facts, but the gap between what you expected and what has occurred. You believed your spouse would understand your needs without instruction. You assumed your children would appreciate your sacrifices. You thought your friends would prioritize the friendship as you do. When reality fails to match these expectations, you feel wounded. But examine closely. The wound stems not from reality, but from your interpretation of reality through the lens of unexamined expectation. The sovereign heart maintains a discipline of separating the pain of disappointment, which is real and may be felt fully, from the power to govern one's entire emotional state, which you may consciously decline to grant. You can be disappointed that your partner forgot an important occasion while refusing to interpret this as evidence they do not care for you. The feeling is legitimate. The interpretation is choice. I learned to ask myself, what am I demanding of this person? Is it reasonable? Have I communicated it clearly? Am I requiring that they be other than who they are? Often, I discovered my suffering stemmed not from others' behavior, but from my insistence that they be different from their actual nature. This recognition transformed chronically difficult relationships by ending my exhausting battle against reality. When you release expectations that do not match the actual capacities of those you love, something remarkable occurs. You can love them for who they are, rather than resenting them for who they are not. You give from fullness, rather than obligation. Disappointment still comes. This is inevitable when dealing with imperfect humans, but it no longer destroys your peace. You feel it, acknowledge it, and proceed. This is not lowering your standards. It is accepting truth. Your behavior remains under your control. Theirs does not. Choose how you shall conduct yourself regardless of what others do, and you have reclaimed sovereignty in the very arena where most people remain perpetually enslaved. The sovereign body, mastery under physical duress. The body shall suffer. This is the price of embodied existence, and there is no escape from it. Illness arrives uninvited. Energy wanes when you require it most. Pain establishes residence in your flesh, and age makes its inevitable claims with perfect indifference to your protests. But the champion does not permit physical discomfort to colonize his entire being. He acknowledges it. There is no virtue in pretending otherwise, yet refuses to organize his life around its avoidance. During the war years, I worked hours that would have broken men of supposedly stronger constitution. 4 or 5 hours of sleep were luxury. The days extended into night, sustained by cigars, brandy, and what observers charitably called an iron will. There were mornings when fatigue pressed upon me like a physical weight, when every bone protested, when sensible men would have demanded rest, but the work awaited doing. So, I did it. Not by pretending I felt no weariness. I acknowledged it fully, but I refused to let that weariness determine whether I fulfilled my duties. The fatigue was fact. Whether it governed my actions was choice. This distinction made all the difference. Many people, when experiencing chronic discomfort or limitation, begin to identify with it entirely. They become a person with back pain or someone who has chronic fatigue. This linguistic and psychological transformation grants the condition far more power than necessary. Practice instead this formulation, I am experiencing pain, rather than I am in pain. Subtle shift, yes. Profound practical difference. When physical discomfort arises, execute this protocol. First, acknowledge it explicitly. I notice I am very tired right now. Second, assess whether it requires action. Does this require rest, or can I proceed? Third, if you can proceed, do so without fighting the sensation. You are not pretending you feel splendid. You are acknowledging discomfort while declining to be governed by it. You possess finite physical resources each day. The question is not whether to spend them, but how. Energy spent resenting your limitations is energy unavailable for actual purpose. Accept your current capacity as fact, then deploy what you have with maximum efficiency. The champion, with half the vigor of ordinary men but who uses that vigor fully, often accomplishes more than robust men who waste their strength on complaint and reactivity. During my final years, I was not the man I had been in my prime. The body that had carried me through cavalry charges and parliamentary battles began to fail in its offices. I could have spent those years in bitter resentment of what age had stolen from me. Instead, I painted, I wrote my histories, I received visitors, I lived within my capacities while maintaining dignity. The body weakened. My sovereignty remained intact. This is what I mean by mastery under physical duress. You honor the body's genuine needs, rest when rest is required, seek treatment when treatment is warranted, acknowledge limitation when limitation exists. But you refuse to be defined by these necessities. You remain yourself even as the flesh protests. Minor discomforts that once derailed your entire day become mere sensations to be noted and released. The sovereign does not pretend invulnerability. He simply refuses to grant temporary conditions permanent governance over his spirit. The nature of true freedom. Liberty begins not with political arrangements but with sovereignty over one's own spirit. A man living in democracy who is enslaved to others' opinions possesses less freedom than a prisoner who maintains inner sovereignty. This is literal truth, not rhetorical flourish. Throughout history, tyrants have understood this principle well. Break the spirit before breaking the body, because a man who cannot be made to fear is essentially unconquerable. Throughout the Blitz, Hitler attempted to shatter British spirit through sustained bombing. The strategy was designed not merely to destroy infrastructure, but to crush morale, to make us so terrified that we would surrender anything to stop the pain. He misunderstood something fundamental about a free people. We felt the terror of the bombs. We would have been inhuman otherwise. But we had cultivated, through centuries of defending liberty, the capacity not to grant fear the power to determine our actions. Thus the Blitz failed in its essential purpose. It hurt us grievously, but it did not injure us where it mattered most. Our spirits remained sovereign, and so we remained free. Consider the hierarchy of freedom carefully. External freedom without internal sovereignty produces merely the illusion of liberty. You may live in a free society while being enslaved to fashion, to peers' approval, to fear of criticism, to the tyranny of your own reactivity. Conversely, internal sovereignty creates a core of freedom that persists even under tyranny. This is why certain prisoners remain freer than their captors. They have maintained sovereignty over the one thing that truly matters: their own evaluation of themselves and their purposes. Every time you choose response over reaction, you practice freedom. Every time you assess injury consciously rather than accepting automatic interpretation, you practice freedom. Every time you refuse to let others' opinions govern your spirit, you practice freedom. These small acts are not metaphorically connected to political freedom. They are literally the same capacity, operating at different scales. Sovereignty proves contagious in the most salutary fashion. When you maintain it, you grant others implicit permission to do the same. When you demonstrate that injuries need not govern spirit, others perceive possibilities they had not recognized. Your sovereignty contributes not merely to your own freedom, but to the freedom of all who observe you. This is why free societies require citizens who possess this capacity. Freedom is not granted solely by institutions, but maintained by character. Throughout my years, I have observed that the freest men are those who have learned to govern their own interpretations rather than being governed by circumstance. They may face adversity, criticism, even genuine persecution, but they retain the capacity to decide what these things shall mean and how they shall respond. No external force can touch this sovereignty without their consent. This is the freedom that matters most. Cultivate it daily in small choices, and you strengthen the foundation upon which all genuine liberty rests. Your personal practice has civilizational significance. You are not merely improving yourself, you are maintaining a tradition upon which freedom depends absolutely. The sovereign leader. What real leadership requires. The capacity for sovereignty separates genuine leaders from mere holders of office. I have observed throughout my years that leaders who fail most catastrophically are those most desperate to avoid injury to their pride. They cannot admit error because to do so feels like self-destruction. They cannot tolerate disagreement because dissent feels like betrayal. They make disastrous decisions rather than accept the momentary discomfort of acknowledging wrong. Their incapacity to bear hurt makes them dangerous to all who depend upon them. I have made mistakes that cost lives. Gallipoli stands as permanent testimony to the consequences of strategic miscalculation. When the full cost became clear, I faced a choice. Defend the decision endlessly to protect my reputation, or acknowledge the failure, extract every lesson, and carry the weight with dignity. I chose the latter, though it was excruciating. But this choice to acknowledge error without being destroyed by it made me capable of better judgment later. Leaders who cannot acknowledge mistakes are condemned to repeat them. The fragile leader defends his ego. The sovereign leader serves his purpose. When criticism arrives, ask yourself, is this about me or about the work? If it concerns genuinely improving the work, receive it regardless of how it feels. If it constitutes merely attack upon your person, note it and proceed. But be ruthlessly honest in this assessment. Most leaders deceive themselves, categorizing legitimate criticism as mere personal attack. When you realize you have made a mistake that affects others, acknowledge it quickly, completely, and without excuse. State clearly, I was wrong about this particular matter. Here is what I learned. Here is how I shall proceed differently. This move, which weak leaders fear will destroy their authority, actually strengthens it considerably. People respect leaders who can acknowledge error far more than those who cannot. The inability to admit wrong signals not strength but fragility. Learn to view opposition as gift rather than threat. When subordinates or colleagues disagree with you, resist the reflexive urge to interpret this as disloyalty. Instead, recognize it as valuable perspective you do not possess. The leader who cannot tolerate disagreement surrounds himself with yes-men and makes catastrophic decisions in an echo chamber of his own creation. The sovereign leader actively solicits opposing views because he cares more about discovering truth than protecting his ego. Throughout the war, I maintained advisors who disagreed with me vigorously. Some meetings were contentious affairs where my proposals faced fierce challenge. This was precisely what I required. I needed men who would tell me I was wrong when I was wrong, not men who would agree with everything to preserve their positions. My ego might smart from their opposition, but the work benefited immensely. Constantly return to this question: how does this serve those who depend upon me? Not, how does this make me appear? This orientation automatically reduces ego-driven reactions. If you lead others, whether in formal position or informal influence, examine your past month honestly. When did you defend your ego rather than serve your purpose? When did you avoid acknowledging error to protect your reputation? When did you dismiss dissent because it felt like attack? When did criticism trigger defensiveness rather than genuine consideration? This audit is not for self-recrimination but for honest assessment. You cannot improve patterns you have not identified. The sovereign leader acknowledges genuine mistakes clearly, then proceeds forward. He does not dwell, does not flagellate himself, does not perform false modesty. He simply corrects course and continues. Genuine leadership becomes possible only when you have learned to bear the hurt of being wrong without being destroyed by it. The sovereign society. Why civilization depends on this. A society that teaches its members they are fragile, that words can wound them beyond recovery, that they require protection from uncomfortable ideas. Such a society cultivates weakness that shall eventually prove fatal. Conversely, a society that teaches resilience, that expects citizens to be robust enough to encounter opposition without crumbling, that treats adversity as opportunity for growth, such a society produces citizens who can sustain free institutions against all threats. This is not abstract philosophy, but practical necessity. Throughout history, free societies have survived only when their citizens possessed the capacity for sovereignty you have been cultivating in these pages. During the war, I faced a choice about how to address the British people. I could minimize dangers, offer false comfort, shield them from harsh realities. Many advisors counseled precisely this approach. Or I could tell them plainly what we faced, trusting their capacity to hear hard truths without breaking. I chose the latter course. I told them about blood, toil, tears, and sweat. I warned that we faced years of struggle with no guarantee of victory. I trusted their capacity to bear hard truths, and they rewarded that trust with magnificent courage. A people treated as fragile become fragile. A people treated as robust become robust. The leader's assumption about human capacity becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. This principle operates not merely in wartime, but in every interaction where we choose between protecting others from reality and trusting their capacity to handle it. Free societies require citizens who can encounter dissent without feeling attacked, who can hear uncomfortable truths without requiring protection, who can face adversity without demanding rescue. When citizens lose this capacity, free institutions become unsustainable because every disagreement becomes crisis, every challenge becomes trauma, every setback becomes occasion for despair. The cultivation of sovereignty is not personal preference but civilizational requirement. If you develop this capacity, you bear responsibility to transmit it, not through lectures but through modeling. When you demonstrate that injuries need not govern spirit, you grant others permission to develop the same capacity. Your sovereignty creates possibility for others' sovereignty. This is how free societies maintain themselves, through transmission of essential capacities across generations. By refusing to be governed by circumstances, by choosing response over reaction, by maintaining sovereignty under pressure, you set a standard that influences others even when you do not intend it. People observe how you handle adversity, criticism, betrayal. Your example teaches far more effectively than your words ever could. This is why your personal practice has public significance that extends far beyond individual benefit. Throughout my years, I have observed that those who maintain sovereignty in small matters prepare themselves for sovereignty in large ones. The man who can choose his response to minor irritation practices the same capacity required to maintain freedom under tyranny. The woman who can acknowledge error without being destroyed practices the same capacity required for genuine leadership. Your daily choices are not merely personal development, but civilizational contribution. You are not simply trying to feel better. You are cultivating the precise capacity upon which liberty depends absolutely. When you practice sovereignty over your own spirit, you strengthen the foundation of free society itself. Your small daily victories have significance that extends across generations. The path of sovereignty is not easy. It requires constant vigilance, honest self-examination, and willingness to choose the difficult right over the comfortable wrong. But it is the path that leads to genuine freedom, the freedom that persists regardless of circumstance, the freedom no external force can touch without your consent. This is the freedom that built parliamentary democracy. This is the freedom that defeated tyranny. This is the freedom you practice each time you refuse to grant injury the power to govern your spirit. Cultivate it faithfully, transmit it generously, and you contribute to the continuation of free civilization itself. The work is before you. Come then, let us proceed with resolution.